Learn about the real Operation Valkyrie first for free over on armchairhistory.tv using code Valkyrie. July 20th, 1944 was a sweltering day in Adolf Hitler's headquarters at the Wolf's Lair. Officers and stenographers crowd around a large map, with the Führer at the center. As he scolds a general for suggesting retreat, a tall, scarred man with a hefty briefcase appears. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg enters, taking his place near Hitler and placing his briefcase under the table. Shortly after, he excuses himself to take an urgent call from Berlin. Colonel Heinz Brandt quickly fills Stauffenberg's spot beside the Führer. Feeling discomforted, he notices Stauffenberg's briefcase obstructing his foot. Annoyed, he considers moving it, but, preoccupied by an itch to sneeze, forgets. Minutes later, a massive explosion shakes the Wolf's Lair. The perfectly placed explosive has done its work. While Operation Valkyrie sought to dismantle the Nazi leadership from within, resistance movements across Europe had been tirelessly fighting back against the Nazi regime in occupied territories since the war's early days. In the latest installment of the Sniper Elite series, and the sponsor of today's video, Sniper Elite Resistance, you can step into the shoes of a resistance sniper during the Second World War. Take on the role of lead operative Harry Hawker, joining forces with the French resistance to fight the Nazis in thrilling single-player and co-op campaigns. Experience engaging sniping mechanics, stealth, and tactical third-person combat, all set in authentically recreated historical environments. Sniper Elite Resistance features meticulously designed weapons, realistic soundscapes, and expansive maps built in collaboration with historians, military experts, and museums. One of my favorite aspects of the game is the advanced rifle ballistic system, where every shot demands you factor in distance, gravity, wind, and even your own heartbeat. Plus, the iconic X-ray kill cam offers a brutal and detailed view of your marksmanship. Support our channel and experience Sniper Elite Resistance using the links in the description or pinned comment. It's available starting January 30th on all major platforms, including Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, PlayStation 5 and 4, Game Pass, and PC via Steam or the Epic Game Store. By 1944, the Second World War turned decisively against Germany. The Soviet Union approached the Reich's borders, while the Allies had landed in Normandy. Across Germany, a coalition of nationalists, conservatives, social democrats, and liberals formed. They devised a plan to remove Hitler, seize the Wehrmacht, and make peace with the Western Allies, all to save the nation. To achieve this, conspirators adapted an emergency plan to control the replacement army and eliminate Nazi leadership. This was known as Operation Valkyrie. To decapitate Nazi leadership in one blow, the conspirators identified key targets, notably Hitler's successor, Hermann Göring, propaganda minister Josef Goebbels, and SS leader Heinrich Himmler. Some conspiratists saw Himmler as a potential ally. Conservative Prussian finance minister Johannes Pappitz offered him opposition support if he moved against Hitler to secure peace. Though these efforts failed, they gave the SS dangerous knowledge of the conspiracy. After the assassination, Stauffenberg rushed to Berlin to lead the coup. On his orders, co-conspirator Friedrich Fromm initiated operations, ordering Major Otto Ernst Rehmer to surround the propaganda ministry and arrest Goebbels. The conspirators quickly spread the narrative. Top Nazis had killed Hitler, and they would save the Reich. At Göring's home, they found only his corpse, suggesting another force within the Reich was preparing a counter-coup. Himmler, forewarned, positioned the SS strategically. Hours after Operation Valkyrie began, he launched his own coup, which he grandly titled Operation Reichssturm. He used the Gestapo to closely monitor the plot, seized Berlin's broadcasting stations, and branded the conspirators as a threat to the Reich. As Himmler took control, the coup unraveled. High-ranking SS officers occupied Berlin's strategic buildings. Raymer switched sides, surrounding the conspirators' headquarters instead. Desperate to save his own skin, General Fromm ordered the arrest and execution of his co-conspirators, hoping to display his loyalty to the Nazi cause. In just 6 hours, the coup had failed. Although Hitler was dead, Himmler now consolidated control over the Reich. A new day dawned in Germany, but it was one of horrors under the reign of terror of the SS. Himmler doubled down on his philosophies of Aryan purity and total war. The Reich devoted even more resources to eradicating undesirables, ramping up eugenics and breeding programs. Himmler's government unleashed horrors across occupied Europe, yet his terror could not turn the tide of war. By early 1945, the Allies had liberated most of France and Belgium, and the Soviets controlled Eastern Europe. Himmler made token peace offers, all soundly rejected by the Allies. As the German state neared collapse, he began planning to continue the war underground. The regular German army faltered. Its power dwindled ever faster, while the new government diverted much of its needed resources toward the fanatical Waffen-SS. As the collapse of the Reich seemed imminent, in March 1944, Himmler had begun relying on untrained militias and irregular units to operate behind enemy lines. "It is better that a young cohort dies and the nation is saved than that I spare the young cohort and a whole nation of people dies out," he commented. The government poured funds into werewolf groups, terrorist units blending in with civilians to attack occupiers. Even after Berlin fell and Germany surrendered, SS fanaticism lingered. Nazi guerrillas terrorized Central Europe for years. The defensible Alps, in particular, became a Nazi terrorism hotspot, with assassins targeting left-wing politicians, Jews, and immigrants. Only decades later did the Nazi threat in Central Europe finally subside. With a massive explosion behind him, Stauffenberg's deputy phoned the conspirators in Berlin. Operation Valkyrie was to proceed immediately. General Friedrich Albrecht wasted no time securing the coup. Time was of the essence. Within 2 hours, Goebbels and Göring were arrested, and Himmler, whom the conspirators had closely monitored, was neutralized. By day's end, the Nazis lost control of Berlin and the Wehrmacht. In their place rose a shadow government, carefully crafted within the diverse ranks of the German resistance. Field Marshal Erwin von Witzleben, the highest-ranking military member among the conspirators, sent a telegram and took command of the Wehrmacht throughout occupied Europe, establishing it as the supreme authority, surpassing even the Nazi Party. With military control, continuity of government was secured. The new Germany was led by Ludwig Beck, who took the title of Imperial Regent. This government was a coalition of varied ideologies, united only in opposition to Hitler and the war. Most were from the pre-war conservative and nationalist establishment. Beck had initially supported Hitler, but later saw him as a warmongerer, leading Germany to a war that it couldn't win. Many in the new government still viewed the war as just and desired Germany's return as a preeminent European power. The new government aimed to make peace with the Western Allies to continue the fight against the Soviet Union. However, peace would not come easily. Germany still had resources to wage war, and Allied and German goals were worlds apart. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill had made it clear that forced territorial adjustments were unacceptable, while the German government insisted that Austria, Sudetenland, large parts of Poland, and Alsace-Lorraine remain German. Moreover, the Allies demanded Germany's unconditional surrender. Following the coup, Beck instructed Field Marshal Günther von Kluge to discuss an armistice with the Western Allies in France, but negotiations quickly stalled. To the Allies, the new German government was scarcely different from the Nazis in its geopolitical aims. Poland's government in exile resolutely rejected German territorial claims, and Churchill viewed the new regime as a continuation of the Nazi state, remarking, "The highest personalities in the German Reich are murdering one another, while the avenging armies of the Allies come close upon the doomed and ever-narrowing circle of their power." The Western Allies resolutely rejected Germany's peace proposal. Proposals for peace were made to the Soviets as well, but Stalin refused. Despite his mistrust of the West, he too endorsed the formula for unconditional surrender after the Allied landing in Normandy. Negotiations in the West broke down, and the Allies steadily pushed out of their beachhead into the French countryside. Although the coup dealt a blow to the German defenses in both East and West, the Wehrmacht defended Germany competently. In the West, the Germans held off the Allies in the Rhine for several months, while in the East, tactical withdrawals delayed the Soviet offensive in Poland considerably. However, the collapse of the German army was imminent. In the war's aftermath, Germany was occupied by the Allies and the Soviet Union, and a long process of building a new democratic Germany began. The reconstruction effort was arduous. Although Churchill had seen the Nazi and military governments as one and the same, many Germans viewed Beck's government as a treacherous one that had led the German state to ruin. Much like in 1918, a stab-in-the-back myth emerged, in which a corrupt and selfish elite betrayed the Reich. The reconstruction effort was hampered by a stiff neo-Nazi movement, one that revered Hitler and the other Nazis as martyrs. It took years for a stable German democracy to finally take root, and while economic prosperity following the Marshall Plan brought some respite, the 1973 oil crisis would once again facilitate a rise of right-wing extremism in Germany. While the coup was successful, peace seemed distant. Negotiations with both the Soviets and Allies had stalled. Some in the government, like Chancellor Karl Friedrich Goerdeler and Foreign Minister Ulrich von Hassel, realized that drastic measures had to be taken to secure peace with either side, and the conservative nationalists strongly preferred peace with the Western Allies. With the Chancellor's blessing, von Hassel, an experienced diplomat who had led Germany's delegation at the Versailles Peace Conference, received a far-reaching mandate to make peace with the Allies. Roosevelt and Churchill demanded unconditional surrender, but Germany could still count on sympathy among conservative nationalists in the Allied nations. In George Bell, the Anglican Bishop of Chichester, and Allen Dulles, a high-ranking official in the American Office of Strategic Services, von Hassel found useful lobbyists to change the image of the new government in the West. Simultaneously, Goerdeler improved Germany's image. Immediately after taking office, the new chancellor repealed the Nuremberg Laws and made a speech announcing that the persecution of the Jews, which has been carried out in the most inhumane, deeply shaming, and quite irreparable ways, is to cease. Although Churchill's notion that both this and the Nazi government were one and the same seemed ever more distant from reality, Goerdeler would have to take even more drastic overtures to find peace with the West. Despite protests by its people, and even some in the army, Germany announced it would abide by the Atlantic Charter. Minor revolts, especially by Nazi elements in German society, were brutally suppressed. To further disassociate Germany from its Nazi image, the form of government also had to change. Monarchy had long been on the minds of the new government. but the members of the cabinet differed on the exact candidate and powers of the monarch. Ultimately, they settled on Prince Louis Ferdinand of Prussia, the grandson of Wilhelm II, who was to head a constitutional monarchy modeled after the British monarchy. Unlike his father, who had maintained close ties with the Nazis early on, Louis Ferdinand held minimal ties to the Nazi state and had spent years in the United States, where he became a personal friend of Franklin Roosevelt. Although the Allies still insisted on unconditional surrender, opinions of the new German government started to shift. The February 1945 Yalta Conference left Winston Churchill especially wary of Soviet ambitions in Eastern Europe. Churchill's fear opened the door for a German diplomatic initiative. The Prime Minister agreed to meet with von Hassel's representative, who told him that Germany was ready to surrender in the West. He stressed that it was in the Anglo-American interests to maintain Germany as a bulwark against Bolshevism. With trust between the Western Allies and the Soviets at an all-time low, Germany successfully managed to leverage ideological fear and play the former Allies off against one another. The road was cleared for a German surrender in the West. Although the instrument of surrender at Reims at the start of April 1945 was celebrated among the Allied publics as an unconditional surrender, the reality was more complex. The government agreed to a general surrender, but the war in the East continued. After the surrender in the West, Soviet diplomats notified the Western Allies that the surrender would not be recognized by Moscow. According to them, German forces were not explicitly required to lay down their arms and give themselves up as prisoners. Although the Soviets insisted another surrender be signed, the Western Allies responded with silence. This left Germany in a legal limbo. While it was officially at peace, the Soviets refused to accept it and continued their offensive operations. Churchill worried that a Soviet-dominated continent would soon become a reality. Determined to impose the will of the United States and Britain upon the Soviet Union, he convened his top military strategists for a preemptive strike against the Soviets, dubbed Operation Unthinkable. The Second World War morphed seamlessly into a third. With their new German ally, the Western Allies engaged the Red Army. Although surviving the war, Germany was ruled by a national conservative coalition under a constitutional monarchy. The rapid and sweeping political changes left Germany polarized and unstable, while more years of war would leave the country broken and destitute, left only with hopes of a brighter future. Thanks to Sniper Elite Resistance for sponsoring this video. Support our channel and use the link in the description or pinned comment to start playing Sniper Elite Resistance on January 30th, available on all major platforms, including Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, PlayStation 5 and 4, Game Pass, and PC via Steam or the Epic Game Store.